Hi, so many friends here. Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone. I'm Susie. This is Kat, our co-founder Abby in the back. We are so happy to host each of you tonight. It is going to be a wonderful evening. Hopefully you have all, thanks Charlie, yeah, there it is. Hopefully you've made some connections so far, and we'll learn more about connection in a minute. So we are the Psychedelic Assembly, and you are in the Athenaeum right now. This is the world's first psychedelic library and social club. Thank you all. Yeah. It's been a labor of love, and we are happy to host each of you. Definitely grab a pamphlet on your way out to check out our membership program. You get access to the space Monday through Friday, discounts on events, $42 a month or $420 a year. So yeah, take your pick. Also, we wanted to mention to you all that we will be at Psychedelic Science in Denver. Who else will be there? Let's give a shout out. I know Jay will be there. Okay, hell yeah. So we are going to be throwing a very wild welcome party on Tuesday the 20th at a local venue in Denver. So before all the speakers, it'll start at 7. So we are combining comedy, psychedelic comedy, with the famous Shane Moss. He will be introing us. And then we're going to end it with an ayahuasca-inspired DJ set by, DJ Juan McLean, who is a Brooklyn local. He's phenomenal. He actually goes down and studies. He's been doing this for about 10 years, studying ayahuasca and taking the path of a traditional shaman, and then he comes back and sort of like transmits this through his electronic music. It's insane. So he'll be doing a set from 10 to 2 a.m. on Tuesday night. So everyone, please come out to our party. It's going to be the best one of the week. Without further ado, we are so happy to introduce why we all came tonight. So most of you know Rachel Nuwer, incredible award-winning journalist for the New York Times. She just wrote her second book, I Feel Love, MDMA and the Quest for Connection in a Fractured World. We are so happy to host her. We are so happy to know her. The fact that she's writing about this, it is what we are trying to do in the Athenaeum. You know, this isn't like a consumption space or a trading post, but we are open to foster connection in the day-to-day with people who are interested in these things. So, very, very excited to have Rachel here. And she will be having a conversation, Q&A, with the lovely Sarah Rose Siskind, who is on our board of advisors. We're very lucky to have her in our corner. She's an incredible psychedelic comedian and educator. She is a brilliant writer, and she's the founder of PsyCom. So let's hear it for the lovely Rachel and Sarah.
The first thing she said was, "Where is my alcohol?" as she got upset. Out. All right. I'll go over. There you go. Yeah, I just need the champagne. All right. We're good? We're good. All right. Let me see. All right. So we are here to talk about this book, I Feel Love, MDMA, and why it should be banned. And what's there was the last minute editor check, I think. No, this is a really phenomenal book. I hope you guys buy it. It's really great. So the first question I have for Rachel, though, is might be a surprise to those of you who are looking at the title. Is love really your middle name?
Love is literally my middle name, but we thought it would be like clashing if there was too much love on the title page of this book, but it has created like a strange situation with Goodreads where they think I'm two different people. There's Rachel Love Nuwer, the dead animal person, and then there's Rachel Nuwer, the drug person. So if anybody has any connects at Goodreads, please help me resolve this issue.
Your editors were so wrong. Love is your middle name. That's insane. That's so cool. Okay, so I'm just going to instead kick off with a bunch of compliments and make you very uncomfortable. This is a really phenomenal, gorgeous read. It's a great starting point for novices. It's a really comprehensive and exhaustive, scientifically rigorous treatise, frankly, for all of the experts out there. It's a really good book, and the thing that I like the most about it is that it's really an ensemble cast. Like, the cast of characters that you describe in this book is truly amazing. And just as an example of this, I have a couple passages highlighted of how you just described Rick Doblin. So the first mention, this is like a really nerdy book report right here. The first mention is Rick Doblin's baby blue attic is part hobbit hole, part psychedelic hoarder's paradise.
My Tolkien fandom is showing.
Okay, this one's maybe my favorite. Doblin realized he'd just been handed a legal revelation of utmost importance, despite being off the clock and super high. And then finally, you demonstrate his character by when he celebrated a huge FDA regulatory win that he immediately smoked a J in the parking lot of the FDA.
Before that was okay.
Before it was cool.
1990, whatever.
So yeah, the book is phenomenal because it's like scientifically rigorous, but it has these really beautiful stories in between of like just a cast of amazing characters.
A cast of amazing characters.
Oh gosh, wow. A cast of amazing characters. Audiences. Yeah. And so the next one has to incorporate everybody in the room, just so you know.
All on the
Gotta
record,
get those
everybody.
book sales up. So yeah, I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit just to start off. Actually, the best place to start off is probably like, what would you say is the elevator pitch of the book, just to quickly describe it?
I would say that usually when people have an idea about MDMA, it's one of two extremes. They think of evil brain hole eating MDMA of the 1990s, of certain raver kids that are present in the room today. They think about MDMA as this, miracle cure that's going to solve you of all your problems and, rid the world of its woes. In fact, MDMA is much more nuanced than that, and that's why it is so interesting. There.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Who would you say is the audience for this book?
So I wrote this book for everyone from my mom, who is, extremely anti-drug. When I told her I was writing this book, her reaction was, "Oh." To people who have done MDMA, 500 times, to like people like Rick Doblin. And I tried to make it as interesting as possible in terms of just encompassing history, culture, politics, the process of science, and how all those things come together to influence, how we conceive of things, how we approach things in society, how we approach medicine. The answer is everyone.
Spoken like a good saleswoman. I love that. So I want to get more in depth. This book reminded me a lot of the feeling I had when I first read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, in the sense of like it really does feel like a moment in history when all of these beautiful weirdos, like bright stars in the constellation of the psychedelic experts, are like moving the ship forward, to mix a bunch of metaphors. And I think of it as like a wonderful, sort of beautiful picture of a moment in time. But what do you see as the goal of this book?
Yeah, I think that was a really good summary.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I just, while I was working on this book with my editor, Ben, who's here somewhere, he's so amazing, Ben said, we need to think of MDMA as the protagonist of this story, and that really helped me sort of focus in my head, like, what I was trying to do here, which is MDMA's story, its conception from its patenting in 1912 by the German pharmaceutical company Merck, to its discovery of its psychoactive properties, its spread into the therapeutic community, its jumped from the therapist's couch into the dance floor, its demonization and now its emergence back into scientific credibility, and just this wonder drug of the electronic dance music scene. So, like the whole thing, the idea was just to give MDMA its due. You know, Michael Pollan really did a wonderful job with LSD and psilocybin, but MDMA has a story too, and I felt like that story deserved to be told.
Yeah, you know, I'm just realizing, yeah, please. That's a very easy applause break, like right at my time. Let's hear it for MDMA. No, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, one thing you just mentioned that I just think is, like, in some ways I think, not to commit sort of like generational warfare here, but like that is, no, but like that's Pollan's book to write as a boomer.
Oh,
and,
wow.
you know, it's harder for him to tell the story as closely as, you know, people of a younger generation who know the sort of like the story of MDMA.
That's a really good point. And actually, when I interviewed Michael Pollan for this book, I asked him at the end of the interview, sort of like off the record, what his advice would be for someone writing a book about drugs. And
Nobody
like,
take notes.
Yeah.
Immediately forget everything she's about to say.
But he's like, you know, to win people over, you need to really come at this with skepticism, and you need to be like, I think like drugs are bad, and like, you know, I'm simplifying the message, but that was a little bit challenging for me to do. I do think that his book kind of paved the way for like not having to necessarily approach it from this like very like, you know, let's see about these like scary drugs point of view.
Yeah, and he certainly did a lot of the work of, you know, like I remember I bought that book and I put it on my parents' bed. Didn't even tell them what it was about, just put it on their bed. In the same way, they bought me a book about puberty. Pay it forward. So I guess in that line, do you consider MDMA to be a psychedelic?
Okay, such a good question. So first of all, to get everybody on the same page about like a psychedelic, a mind manifesting drug, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
A+.
So mind manifesting, I mean, I think MDMA is mind manifesting, but when I first came to this project, I actually did not consider MDMA to be a psychedelic. I thought of psychedelics in the classic sense of LSD, psilocybin, you know, rich hallucinations. Maybe your ego dissolves and you see the universe and melt into a puddle of muck. MDMA is not that for people who have experienced it well know. However, there's some really interesting new neuroscience that I think actually solves the question about MDMA being a psychedelic in the affirmative. MDMA, I think, is a psychedelic because based on this researcher's work out of Johns Hopkins University, her name is Guldo Lin, incredible neuroscientist. She has found that MDMA, along with LSD, psilocybin, ibogaine, and ketamine, all act on the same neural mechanisms down to the level of DNA transcription, which is like super, super basic. So,
I'm sorry. Come on, it's blowing right now.
so it's like, yeah, so I think it's like kind of a mic drop for her on the question, is MDMA a psychedelic? Because at the root, at least in a therapeutic context, all these molecules are acting on the same very, very basic level mechanistically. So I think it's a psychedelic, so, you know, but obviously she needs to be replicated, we'll see.
Yeah, that's awesome. But
Yeah,
thanks for the like insider scoop right there.
Yeah, her study's coming out June 16th in Nature.
Wow.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's something to watch. That's awesome. So I mean, that kind of ties into my next question, which is related, which is, what was one of the most surprising things you discovered in the course of the research for the book?
So I didn't really know much about MDMA, like outside of like sort of personal experiences when I came to this project. So really, like everything was surprising, from the like rich community here in New York City around MDMA to the history of the drug. You know, like I said, dating back to 1912. But I think perhaps the most surprising thing is the lack of knowledge about MDMA. So there's really just among like drug nerds, like a baseline lack of understanding about what MDMA even is. So, you know, ecstasy was the name that MDMA was branded in the 1980s, and, you know, it held on to that through the 90s, and then in the mid-aughts or the early aughts, it went through a rebranding campaign because show producers wanted to distance themselves from the sort of taint of ecstasy and new legislation that was coming up around it, and they renamed it Molly. And people today, a lot of people I encountered actually think that Molly is a different drug than ecstasy. That's not to say that your ecstasy and your Molly are actually MDMA. Who knows what those street drugs contain unless you have them tested. But there's just, even what they are, people don't understand. So that was really surprising to me.
Yeah, that was very surprising to me too, actually, is the amount of public misunderstandings about MDMA. And later on, I'll get into that, which is actually my favorite thing to discuss. We have to get through a bunch of boring questions first. No, I'm just kidding. All of these are bangers. So I'm curious what didn't make the cut in the book, besides your middle name. Which is a shame, and your editor should be fired if you do it. Just kidding. It's all love.
A lot, pretty much everything I wanted to say made it into the book, but I will say I could have written an entire book, or maybe an HBO miniseries, or a 10-part podcast. Any producers out there about the Texas group, which was really the first
that was my favorite part of the book. Yeah.
Yes, it's so interesting. This is the first huge multinational grade MDMA producers for the recreational scene. They emerged in the 80s and continued through the early 90s before they were busted by the DEA. And there's just so many plot twists, backstabbing and love affairs and weird characters. And what I think that's really fascinating about this group of MDMA producers is they're not your typical or your stereotypical narcos traffickers. They were all in it because they wanted to make the world a better place. They wanted to expand people's consciousnesses, whatever that really means to each of us. But they also wanted to make a lot of money. So I would have loved to really delve into the Texas group, but space constraints. I just focused on one chemist in particular. Her name was Karina. She was from the Philippines, and she was recruited from Intel to become this baller MDMA chemist. So yeah,
my jaw dropped when I read that passage because I didn't know about her, and I try to stay fairly informed about this stuff, and it's this fascinating story that is definitely a fucking Netflix miniseries about this really intelligent Filipino chemist, and this he's just one of the best villains ever. Clegg, even his name, even the name. And he's just your every spiritual asshole ever. He's a guru who's just totally power tripping. Oh my god, yes. That chapter really has to be made into movie.
Karina, by the way, is a hiking guide in Sedona, so if anybody wants to go on a hike, she does a great tour.
So the Dallas Club, oh my god, definitely needs to be a movie. I'm kind of curious, what do you see in your head shaking out if MDMA does get legalized? What would happen in society?
Are we talking medical use or the whole shebang?
More sociocultural impact.
I wish Rick was here to answer this. I would love to see that because I think that's just going to reduce so many of the harms that inadvertently come from MDMA use that stem directly from prohibition, which is tainted drugs, people not knowing how to take their drugs, people taking too much of the drug. All these things are because we don't know what we're getting. So first of all, it's going to save lives, literally. And I think people are going to have better experiences on MDMA should they so choose to come to it. I personally hope, and I know Dan here is a doubter, we were discussing this earlier, but that MDMA can help people heal their own trauma so that they can open up and have more space for caring about other people, for caring about the planet, just for having more bandwidth to care in general. And I would love to hear other perspectives on that in the Q&A, but that's my hope. Maybe it's naive, but
yeah, if anyone wants to take the position of hate in the Q&A, please feel free.
I don't want to be misunderstood.
Okay.
I think it's great for inner healing. I hope it leads to interest in healing the world too.
We're all throwing our
I'm not convinced yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see, you know, or it could just be a good time.
Haters gonna hate.
Yeah.
All right, so off of that question, here's one of the things I think about a lot with MDMA and psychedelics generally. People don't always come to similar conclusions. Many people who write about this stuff are very optimistic that we'll come to the same conclusions about war and climate change. But MDMA, as Stan Grof called it, and many psychedelics, is a non-specific amplifier, essentially meaning you really don't have control over the conclusions that people are going to come to or even what their mind will fixate on. So if psychedelics allow us to come to different conclusions, are they still worthwhile to legalize?
Okay, I was going to use the non-specific amplifier quote. Dang. So I met someone in my reporting that I think really demonstrates the possibilities of that question, but also the limits. So I interviewed this guy in Chicago named Brendan, and he used to be the leader of this alt-right fascist movement that wanted to basically like take over the country and become like white supremacist USA. Brendan was doxxed, his identity was released, and he lost his job, he lost all his friends, his family ostracized him. And in that sort of mind frame, he went to take part in a study at the University of Chicago. He didn't know what this study was. He knew he was getting some kind of drug, and then he was going to be like touched. And it was like a study actually studying MDMA and the pleasantness of feeling, but he didn't know that going in. And so he got some pill, he didn't know what it was, and this researcher's touching his arm, and suddenly he is like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Like, I am totally on the wrong path. Like, love is the answer, love. And it was this profound thing for him. But you also have to remember that Brendan was sort of primed to be doing a reevaluation of his life and what had brought him to that moment, you know? If Brendan had just come in as his like white supremacist leader self, he probably just would have been more convinced that he was on the right path to white supremacy. So that non-specific amplifier thing I think is really true. I think it can be helpful for people who are already open-minded. So like in Israel, for example, there's Israelis and Palestinians who are coming together and doing MDMA and ayahuasca, but these are people who are super open-minded and are into exploring peace. So it's not going to like make Donald Trump love the world if you put MDMA in his Diet Coke.
Diet Coke may make him lose a few pounds. So, yeah, maybe try it. No, but I really like on the topic. I really liked what Ben Sessa said, where he was talking about how like we shouldn't necessarily as therapists put like Buddha and other Eastern philosophy totems in the room with people because people may not believe in that, and you should meet your patients where they are. I thought that was kind of profound. And there's a lot of people in the book, like, what's great about the book is it's a wonderful ensemble and humanizing depictions of a lot of people, but the villains are really good. Not the villains, it's like very us for othering thoughts. But anyway, the villains, like this guy, fucking Michael Clay, just to bring it back to him for a second, like
this is the leader of the Texas group.
Yeah, he just he sold MDMA to that guy, the Bhagwan, the like cult leader, that he would put in they would put in the drinks of people before they did like fundraisers or like pledge drives. Which I was like, my first thought was like, oh my God, Rick Doblin should do that. But no, what a terrible thing. That's true. I've been doing pretty well. Okay, I'm going to get actually to, we're going to open it up to questions very, very soon. What's the last one? Okay, penultimate question. Is MDMA better than other drugs?
Ooh. We should do a poll. Honestly, I think it's like there's no pet that's better than other pets. Like some people like dogs, some people like cats, some people like rabbits. I learn people. But it's just like a personal preference. I love MDMA. I also love other certain drugs, but I think MDMA is my baby.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay. So yes.
You're fine. All right, so last one, and I guess I should have ended on that one because this one's a little bit more critical, but, well, critical, you'll see in a moment. The book shines a light on a lot of shitty science throughout MDMA's history. And that's one of the things I'm super interested in, because this book sheds a light on issues like cherry-picking data, shoddy records in general, misinterpreting MRIs, creating reasonable doses for patients. You know, like, surprisingly, if you give somebody like 50 doses, standard doses of MDMA, they're not gonna have a great time. You know, and then finding truly random samples. Like, there's just so much shitty science, and this isn't even from like the 1800s. This is like from the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I'm just
90s and 2000s.
Yeah, and I'm just really curious, like, do you think that we're getting better on that score? And like, how can journalists and like just influencers and like well-read readers do a better job of interpreting the science? No pressure.
Yeah, well, I'll go back to the past for 1 second just to give people an idea of like how dire the situation was. The politicization of science around MDMA and other scheduled drugs in the 90s and early aughts was just like so intense and so aimed at showing the harms of these drugs that researchers published a paper in Science in like, I think 2002 or 2003, where they accidentally gave monkeys methamphetamine instead of MDMA. And all these monkeys, you know, dropped dead or had these horrible reactions, and they published those results. But, you know, those results should have raised a red flag to them. Like, this isn't what MDMA does based on past experiences. It doesn't affect dopamine systems like this. It doesn't cause Parkinson's-like symptoms. But they were just so focused on proving the harms of MDMA that paper somehow got past peer review. Later, it was retracted when they found out about the mix-up. I hope we've gotten better. I mean, I think so. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, actually.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Yeah,
answer your
please.
question.
Thank you.
We have gotten better because there are terrific science journalists like yourself. And I feel like we're better too.
Shout out to Dan again, science journalist professor.
/ curmudgeon. Why don't you believe in love, Dan? Oh, I'm just kidding. Actually, this is really a good moment to throw it open to questions, and I will say, Dan, I'll give you the opportunity if you want to start us off. Okay. Tomorrow.
Oh yeah, Dan is hosting a virtual talk if people have not gotten enough of me and Dan tomorrow online.
Battle Royale.
What time? Yes. What time is it?
7 p.m.
Thank you.
Yeah, look at Rachel's Twitter feed.
Yes, it's by like a Miami bookstore.
Books
Yes.
and books.
Oh,
Wow, big fans in this.
yes. Super fans.
All right, so I'm going to throw it open to questions, and I think the room is small enough that you can just shout it and we'll all be able to hear it. Any questions? Anyone want to know anything about MDMA? Carissa.
Did your book, or did you come across people talking about related molecules like sassafras and DA or like Kana? Just curious if your book touches on any of that or what you came across in your research.
But definitely, I mean, the book is very, again, focused on MDMA because, you know, it's the protagonist, but insofar as those other molecules are related to MDMA stories, they definitely pop up. So, like, I talk at length about MDA being the jumping off point for chemists in the 70s, Shogun, for example, to then synthesize MDMA by just sticking on a little methyl group. I talk about sassafras tree poaching, for example. So there are some other molecules, but really, like, this is an MDMA book.
All right, other questions? Anyone? Ooh, so sorry. Any other? Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
When doing your research about clinical research study about MDMA, what was your biggest surprise about what they were testing it on what type of patients?
So one thing that really surprised and even impressed me was, so usually in clinical trials of people with PTSD, there's all these exclusions. So if you've tried to commit suicide, you cannot be part of the clinical trial. If you're like super depressed, if you have a substance use disorder, you can't be part of the trial. Because usually it's pharmaceutical companies conducting these trials and they want the best results possible, and these like complicating factors will, complicate things. Whereas in these MDMA-assisted therapy trials for PTSD, they didn't exclude those people, which they specifically did on purpose, because we just want to see if this works on the quote-unquote worst cases and see if it can really help people. So that was surprising and also encouraging for me.
You in the back.
I have a question. In this space, when we're trying to do healing, like, how can we hold people accountable? Like, just bad actors. Like, I'm just gonna say it out loud, and I think we should be able to see these things. But like, Francois Borzat from San Francisco and her husband. I think when we do this work, when we're trying to do this healing, like, I think that's the biggest betrayal. And like, they're walking free. And how can this community that's trying to do this healing hold bad actors accountable? It makes me sick to my stomach. And I'm trying to grapple with like being a part of this community and like recognizing that there's people that are bad actors and really doing tremendous damage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem. Therapist abuse of patients. It's definitely not confined to psychedelic-assisted therapy, but it's amplified by psychedelic-assisted therapy because people are in this, open period of, their neurons are literally open to being rewired. So the damage can be way, way worse. And there are, as you mentioned, documented cases of this happening. And yeah, it's a huge problem moving forward, but I think a first step is to legalize the therapy so that people can be held accountable. When things are done underground, people can get away with this stuff because there's no, board or...
But do you think that the community is really kind of putting an emphasis on making sure, like, we can talk about these bad actors, but there's no consequences? No consequences.
I definitely think the community is thinking about that, but it's going to be up to the community to figure that out. There's a couple groups I cite in the book that have formed specifically to hold people like that accountable or to have like certification systems. But yeah, it's a big problem and we need solutions. But yeah, it's going to be up to the community to figure that out.
She does document a fair number of cases where there are consequences, like with the husband and wife team that were losing their licenses.
Yeah. But they're not in prison.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's like.
I don't know if they would.
I mean, I think that there should be those kind of consequences. Because if there was a consequence to go to prison, then they wouldn't do that stuff. And the thing is like, oh, oops, sorry, I didn't do that, but there's no consequence.
I think that's a fair point, but it's also important to know, like, harsh penalizing is kind of like why we're in the drug war to begin with. So it's like important to know, like, there's only so much that consequences can do.
We're talking about therapists, people that have been trained with ethics.
Yes. It's a very good point. Thank you for bringing it up and worth considering. But for the interest, I do want to get to a couple more questions. Let's do you. So you ask first, and then Colleen, and then that might be it for the night.
This is a more personal question. I'm feel comfortable answering. I'm just wondering, like, what is your favorite set and setting for using
So I'm like a really
favorite set and setting.
Shallow person, and I just really love to go to parties and do MDMA. Also, yes, $3 bill, a Visa, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So great.
I'm coming in, invited to all of them.
Yeah.
Consider yourself invited.
And I think this builds on a question you were asking, Sarah, but do you think we're on a trajectory where MDMA recreationally might be coming behind cannabis and everything else so we don't have to medicalize it?
I sure hope so. I mean, I think we should medicalize it, but I think that that's a really nice way for paving the way for people to think, wait a minute, this is a drug that's being used to heal people. Like, why are we incarcerating people for using the same drug at House of Deaths or wherever? And I know that's the goal of MAPS, to just, legalize drugs and, regulate them in the same way we regulate alcohol or even stricter. So.
Fingers crossed. I think on that note, we'll wrap it up. But thank you guys. Make sure to buy your book. Thanks, guys.